The perfect game. It's one of the most coveted achievements in professional sports, let alone in just the world of professional baseball. What makes an achievement like the perfect game so great is that it can happen any year, any day, and from any start, whether it's the first start of a career or the last. It's accessible to every pitcher who has ever made a start in baseball history, yet Major League Baseball has only seen this accomplishment done 24 times, making it even more coveted. What makes a perfect game so fun is the lingering thought in the back of your head continuously growing each inning. After an inning or two, you might think nothing of it, but as we get into the 4th inning, 5th inning, 6th inning, the thought continues to grow. You might lean forward and lock into every pitch, and you might start wiping that sweat off your palms. Now, of course, that kind of feeling can't be replicated exactly once a perfect game has been solidified into history, but there's still a lot you can learn when rewatching one. Today, I'm gonna do just that. I'm gonna watch every perfect game that occurred in the 21st century and recap the best parts / the most important moments. I'm not gonna just watch each ball in play or just the pitches of the starter who got the perfect game. I'm watching the full, uncut broadcast. I'll be covering what I think will be the toughest out from the pitcher, the most pivotal defensive play in the game, because there usually always is one, who I think was the MVP of the game that wasn't the starting pitcher, and trying to guess the biggest swing and win probability added. I'll point out other stuff I find interesting too, but those are some of the categories I created for myself so we'd have a bit of a format here. Before we begin, I've seen some of these games all the way through and others I've seen only highlights. I'm not going to say which is which because it's been a while and I generally don't remember most moments in these games, so it should be pretty fun to watch them back. So let's start at the beginning, May 04. The exact day is May 18th, 2004, and one of baseball's most decorated pitchers is about to add to his lengthy resume. In Atlanta, Georgia, Randy Johnson takes the mound in his age 40 season against the Braves. It's been a rough season up to this point for both teams, with the Diamondbacks in last place in their division with a 14-23 record, and the Braves in 4th place in their division with a 17-19 record. But it's still early on in that season, and this Braves team did end up winning their division and getting 96 wins on the year. So it's a pretty good team to get a perfect game against. But let's dive straight into one of the most pivotal plays in this game, and we're starting early. Johnson began his start with a first pitch strike, but on the second pitch of the game, Jesse Garcia lays down a powerful bunt to the right side of the infield. Randy Johnson, as a lefty pitcher falling off to the other side of the mound, basically has no chance of covering first base here. So Shea Hillenbrand, like 5 seconds into the game, makes a history-defining play, and since it's the very start of the game, it's just business as usual for him. I'm not saying it's spectacular, it's nothing flashy, but this could have easily ended everything, and it's hard to remember plays like this after it's all said and done. What a way to start. Let's move forward to the second inning. In the top of the second, Alex Cintrone gets one of the most important things out of the way early. He scores a run for his team. Mike Hampton was the Braves starting pitcher for this game, and coming into it, he had an ERA of 7.41 in 7 starts. That's as bad a start to the season as one can imagine, and it's a dream matchup for the Diamondbacks with Randy Johnson in their corner. It sounds obvious, but you gotta score at least once for the perfect game to succeed. Now in the bottom of the second, with 1 out in the inning, Johnny Estrada was determined to be the toughest out. In an 11-pitch at-bat, Estrada fouled off pitch after pitch, forcing Johnson into a 3-2 count. This is actually the only plate appearance in which Johnson was forced into a 3-ball count for the entire game, and after 11 pitches, he gets Estrada swinging with a slider. Over in the bottom of the 5th inning, that unavoidable feeling that something special could be happening starts to set in for these Arizona commentators. After a first pitch lineout by Andrew Jones, color commentator Mark Grace breaks the ice.
When you start to see some outs like that, you kind of think, I wonder if this might be a special night. And that's all I'm going to say.
Leave it at that.
Leave it at that, says our play-by-play caller. And if you're thinking, that voice sounds familiar, I'll just say that play was a pretty deep drive into left field, and leave it at that. Just after this play, Estrada continues to be a nuisance for Randy Johnson. During this 7-pitch at-bat, he follows off a few pitches and is just mere feet away from a base hit down the left field line. It's been a scary inning for line drives to say the least. Down to the bottom of the 6th inning, with 2 outs already, Randy Johnson faces his pitching counterpart, Mike Hampton. Hampton proceeds to hit a slow chopper to Alex Cintrone, who gloves the ball and narrowly gets Hampton at first base. This is a pretty great perfect game-saving play. Now we're in the top of the 7th inning, and offense has been pretty quiet for the Diamondbacks. Although Johnson is 9 outs away from history, some insurance runs are necessary to secure a win at the minimum. With Alex Cintrone ripping yet another double and Robbie Hammock working a walk, Chad Tracy knocks an RBI single up the middle. Hammock gets caught in a rundown, which ends the inning, but it's still 2-0 Diamondbacks. This is a play I definitely have in consideration for the highest win probability added, but I'm not sure how it's going to differ from the one earlier in the game. After that, I only really have one more notable thing about this game, and that's Chipper Jones. Julio Franco is the only player from Atlanta's lineup who faced Randy Johnson more than Jones in their career. Not only that, but Chipper Jones could hit off Randy Johnson. In 39 career plate appearances, Jones slashed .361, .410, .889 for an OPS of .1299 against Randy Johnson. So the bottom of the 7th inning being the moment he goes 3 for 3 striking out Chipper Jones is pretty remarkable. And that's all the big moments I wanted to gather from this game. Of course, Randy Johnson successfully closed down his first ever perfect game with 117 pitches, 13 strikeouts, and just 2 hours and 13 minutes of total game time. So let's finalize those big moments into the categories I was talking about, starting with the toughest out for Johnson. I think it has to go to Johnny Estrada. You could definitely argue for Chipper in any other game as he's Chipper Jones and he's had good numbers against Johnson, but in this game specifically, Estrada had the longest plate appearance with 11 pitches and the third longest was 7. He had 12 foul balls in total by constantly fighting in his ABs, was the closest to walking, and was one of the closest to getting a hit with that foul ball in the 5th. In a game where nobody on his team could get on base, I think he deserves the title as the toughest out. As for the most pivotal defensive play, if you think it's Alex Cintrone's play in the bottom of the 6th, I would not argue with you. But something about Shea Hillenbrand's play in the first inning resonated with me so much. On any other day, a first baseman could have botched this play or taken it less seriously. Or he could have thought, it's the first batter of the game, who cares? Cintrone's play had significantly more pressure given the situation, but there's something about the lack of pressure on Hillenbrand's play that made it so important in my eyes. But don't worry, I think Cintrone is easily this game's non-pitcher MVP, and that's beyond his game-saving play in the 6th. He had the most hits, going 3 for 4 with 2 doubles, and helped produce both runs for the D-backs. Finally, we have the top play in terms of win probability. Win probability, for those that don't know, is the odds to win from right after a play minus the odds to win before it. Basically, it shows how much of an odds increase or decrease that one play had. That's it. In perfect games, it's pretty unlikely that a singular play in the pitcher's start could have the highest win probability added because 27 straight outs really limits any big swings in win probability. Basically, I just want to see if the most effective offensive contribution in the game is the first run produced in the game, because win probability doesn't know that it's a perfect game as it's going on. That being said, I'm torn between the Cintrone RBI double in the 2nd and the Tracy RBI single in the 7th, but I'm leaning toward the Tracy single since it was late in the game and the score was only 1-0 before it. And it looks like I'm wrong, just barely. I immediately noticed that what I forgot to take into account wasn't just the fact that Cintrone's hit was a double instead of a single, but the fact that Tracy's hit led to Hammock being out on the base paths and ending the inning. That out is likely what lowered the play's win probability added. And that's all I've got for this one. On May 18th, 2004, Randy Johnson became the oldest player to throw a perfect game. He already had an illustrious Hall of Fame guaranteed career. This was just the cherry on top. Moving 5 years in the future to July 23rd, 2009, we have Mark Buehrle's perfect game. Buehrle, to me, is the definition of a solidly consistent starter. He played 16 years in the league and rarely had an injury. After his first year, which was in the bullpen, he had at least 30 starts a year, every single year, and only had below 200 innings one time. All of this led to a 3.81 career ERA. Consistently above average, consistently healthy, and that is absurdly valuable. But that's not the only thing he'd be good at in today's game. Buehrle was also notorious for being one of the quickest workers on the mound, which is immediately noticeable if you watch his starts. If you're like me, and you've gotten so used to the pitch clock dictating the tempo of every game nowadays, I'm always instantly reminded with how slow things were before. But Buehrle was built for the pitch clock era. Buehrle took the mound in the south side of Chicago against the Tampa Bay Rays, the reigning American League champions. The Rays were doing well at this point in the season record-wise, but they had a long way to go in a tough division. The Sox, on the other hand, had a worse record, but were only a game back in the AL Central. We'll be jumping straight into the top of the second. Carlos Pena works the first of many 3-ball counts that Buehrle had in this game. In this AB, he had Pena 0-2, but 3 straight balls made this a 3-2 count. Subsequently, Pena ended up popping out in foul territory. Nothing crazy competitive, but it was tied for the most pitches he threw in an at-bat this game with 7. Moving down to the bottom of the second inning where the White Sox are threatening to do some damage. Josh Fields gets set in the box with the bases loaded and cranks one to the left field seats to make it 4-0 White Sox. I'll try to find other plays in this game that can influence the win probability as much as a grand slam, but we all know it's not going to happen. I have a few plays in the next 3 innings that I don't see being that integral by the end of it, but they're worth pointing out. The first is in the top of the third, where a running play is made by the left fielder Carlos Quentin. So far, this is pretty much the only play that had a chance of falling for a hit, but it was still fairly routine. The next play is in the bottom of the 5th. Back-to-back doubles by Scott Podsednik and Alexei Ramirez helps to extend Chicago's lead 5-0. This play isn't going to be remotely close to the win probability that Fields' home run added, but it's noteworthy. Now in the top of the 6th. With 2 outs in the inning, Jason Bartlett works his way into a 3-0 count, putting Buehrle in a bad spot. He left a few pitches close to the plate, but Bartlett was just not biting on anything. That patience ended up becoming a positive for Buehrle, as the next 2 pitches were pretty much grooved over the plate, just asking Bartlett to do something with them, and he doesn't. Bartlett fouls off the next pitch and then grounds out to the shortstop Alexei Ramirez. Even though Bartlett was the 9-hole hitter, he's created the toughest at-bats so far for Buehrle. Also, coming back in the count down 3-0, especially with 2 get-me-over fastballs, is ballsy. Not to mention the crowd audibly groaning at every called ball and cheering just a bit louder than they normally would for a called strike. Everyone watching in that stadium and on TV knows, but I've yet to mention when the commentators started acknowledging it. Up until this point, Ken Harrelson and Steve Stone were doing a pretty standard, treat it like any other day of the week kind of thing. Harrelson saying, 18 up, 18 down is about as far as they'd go. But the part that was most notable for me was in the bottom of the 6th, where the cameras show Mark Buehrle in the dugout and he's just chit-chatting and joking with his teammates while 9 outs away from a perfect game. This leads Steve Stone to say,
"Well, there's a man that is really tense. He's got to be the loosest fellow around."
And all Harrelson can do is laugh about it. That pretty much opened the floodgates, and from then on, Harrelson was acknowledging that Buehrle had a perfect game going a few times for the rest of the broadcast. I could be overanalyzing, but I think they saw Buehrle breaking the mold for how a pitcher usually acts during a perfect game, and they followed suit. In the last few innings, we get some even more close calls to ending this perfect game. BJ Upton hooks a ball just a few feet foul that may have been the closest anyone's got to a hit so far. However, Pat Burrell was able to make an entire stadium feel a massive range of emotions. He rips a ball down the left field line that lands just barely foul. It's kind of hard to see as we only get one replay and the quality isn't very good, but it almost even hits Laz Diaz, the third base umpire. Burrell doesn't make the rest of the at-bat easy either, and he even gets into another one, but hits it right to the third baseman, Gordon Beckham. After just a 10-pitch, 3-minute-long bottom of the 8th from Tampa's Dale Thayer, Buehrle gets right back to work in the 9th. Dwayne Wise comes into the game as a defensive replacement for Carlos Quentin, taking over center field duties while Podsednik shifts over to left. If you haven't seen this one, I'll just let it play out.
That ball hit deep into left center field. Wise back. Makes the catch! What a play by Wise!
It's one of the most remarkable catches I've ever seen, and it's magnified tenfold by the situation. Wise bobbling the ball too is just completely insane. Buehrle then gets himself into his 5th 3-ball count of the game, but we all know how it's gonna end. He strikes out Hernandez and Bartlett grounds out to seal the perfect game. Here's something interesting I want to show as well. In their careers, so this includes after this game, most of these Rays players hit very well against Buehrle. For each guy in the Rays lineup, here's how their career on base percentage was against him. Going into this game too, the Rays were second in the entire league that year in on base percentage. You'd think a team like that would be well equipped to counter a perfect game, but it just didn't happen. I think we have some clear-cut winners of the best moments in this game. I think the toughest out for Buehrle was definitely that 3-0 count that he worked back from against Jason Bartlett, and Bartlett was one of 3 players to put a ball in play in each of his ABs, so I'll give it to him. As for the most pivotal defensive play, we all know that belongs to Dwayne Wise. I think it's easy to give the non-pitcher MVP to Wise as well for the same reason, even if Fields' grand slam sealed the game early. I am going to guess confidently that the grand slam was the biggest shift in win probability, and yep, it's not very close either. 28% win probability added for the Sox on that grand slam. After the perfect game was done, Buehrle actually said he had a bad bullpen session and also had never thrown to Ramon Castro in a game before. There were many factors that went against this one, but Mark Buehrle deserved this moment just as much as anyone. May 9th, 2010. Not even a year after Mark Buehrle made history in Chicago, we move ourselves west to Mother's Day in Oakland, California. Dallas Braden takes the mound for the Oakland Athletics against the Rays again. The Tampa Bay Rays, who have almost the same lineup as they did against Buehrle, suffer the fate of another perfect game, so get used to seeing a lot of familiar names. Braden had spent years bouncing between the majors and the minor leagues, but this season was really going to be one where he had a full workload in the majors. I do have more background info to talk about, but for now, let's jump straight into this one immediately. And we're going to get started with the first play of the game. Jason Bartlett is playing leadoff in this game, and on the second pitch, he ropes one over the head of Kevin Kuzminoff, who jumps up and gets it. I made this clear in the Randy Johnson section, but I love the early game plays before the thought of a perfect game even enters these players' minds. This is a great play by Kuzminoff, and very well could be the best defensive play in the game. We then get another great play early in the second inning. Carlos Pena hits one hard right at Derek Barton, who fields a tough hop and gets an unassisted play at first. I think Kuzminoff's was better, but it was a good play nonetheless. In the bottom of the inning, the A's get their first run on the board. After back-to-back singles by Kuzminoff and Chavez to start the inning, Landon Powell gets an RBI single with 2 outs, and Chavez goes first to third. By the next inning, the A's get back-to-back-to-back singles as Kevin Kuzminoff delivers an RBI and Sweeney goes first to third. Kuzminoff has already had a huge impact on this perfect game early on. He's made a great defensive play and already has been part of both runs that the A's scored. And we're not quite done with Kuzminoff yet. Back to Braden on the mound in the fourth, Jason Bartlett comes up for the second time and gets behind early in an 0-2 count, but is able to work it full. On the sixth pitch of the at-bat, he hits a weak ground ball to the left side, and immediately you could see he starts busting it down the line. But Kuzminoff has got Braden's back like he has all game and makes a great play. They don't show a replay in this broadcast, but we can see he just gets Bartlett at first with a stretch from Barton. The A's do put more runs on the board this inning thanks to a Derek Barton single and some really sloppy defense from the Rays that allowed both a run to score and Barton to get to third. As we jump forward to 2 outs in the 6th inning, Gabe Kapler puts up what I think was easily one of the toughest at-bats of the game for Braden thus far. He works a 12-pitch at-bat. After watching the first and second pitch go for strikes, he proceeds to foul off 7 pitches and takes 2 balls. Braden wins this 12-pitch at-bat with Kuzminoff getting the putout in foul territory. Definitely the toughest AB so far. The bottom of the 6th inning is when the announcers Glenn Kuiper and Ray Fosse can't help but mention the perfect game that is brewing.
I know our good friend Monty Moore is probably watching the game today down in Porterville, and he's saying, Ray, Glenn, talk about it. Doesn't matter. You cannot control it from the broadcast booth. Dallas Braden has a perfect game.
And he's not wrong. Moving along now, I've got just a few more plays I want to highlight. The first is this play in the top of the 8th by none other than Kevin Kuzminoff. On the first pitch of Carlos Pena's at-bat, he pops one up way foul to the left side, and Kuzminoff sprints all the way over to the edge of the A's dugout and makes the play. In pretty much any other ballpark in the majors, this is an unmakeable play, but the Coliseum's dimensions allow for a huge foul territory. We're going to end off this perfect game with Gabe Kapler Kapler's at-bat in the 9th, just like we did for Buehrle. The difference this time is Kapler is the 9-hole hitter, so he's in line to be the last batter of this perfect game. After throwing a close called pitch high and an outside corner pitch for a strike, Braden throws an up-and-in fastball to make it 2-1. Kapler could have been standing just a bit closer to the plate, and this could have been a hit-by pitch to ruin the perfect game. Even knowing the result of this game, I still couldn't help but tense up when I saw that happen. After that, he takes another ball, putting Braden in a tough 3-1 count, but he swings at the next pitch to make for an easy groundout, sealing the perfect game for Dallas Braden. I think it's pretty easy to award Kapler as the toughest out for Braden in this game. He was the only player to have an at-bat with more than 6 pitches, and it was double that. He sent a foul ball long enough for a home run and one that landed just foul down the line. Kapler was pretty determined to accomplish what he got robbed of in Buehrle's perfect game, but came up short once again. So I give him a lot of credit for being such a tough out in these games. As for the most pivotal defensive play, I think it's between the first play of the game by Kuzminov and that running play in the 8th inning, also by Kuzminov. I think I'm going to give it to the play he made in the 8th, simply because this play can't be made in any other stadium except for the Coliseum, which adds a cool uniqueness to it. The non-pitcher MVP of this game has to go to Kuzminov as well. Those two defensive plays were huge, and each showed different levels of pressure during a perfect game. He also had a great day at the plate, going 2 for 4 with an RBI and a run scored. So in that case, he's the clear non-pitcher MVP for me. I also want to guess that Kuzminov's RBI single in the 3rd was the biggest play in terms of win probability added, and it looks like it was, tied with Powell's single in the 2nd with 11%. One really interesting thing is, like Buehrle, Braden was not quite feeling up to his usual standards before this game. He woke up late, didn't do his usual routine, and there wasn't a lot of confidence that he'd have his best stuff. And he said himself when reflecting on it that he was hungover before this game. Now, I don't want this to be a reflection of Braden's work ethic at all, as there's significantly more at play here. He's made comments when reflecting on his perfect game about how this particular day has been a rough one for him. And I really implore you to read more, as it does way better justice than I can do. All I'll say is you'll never really be able to understand how another person deals with these things in their life, and it has to be irritating to have constant reminders of bad memories. With the rest of this season, Braden was able to get 30 starts and at 190 innings pitched. We got to see glimpses of some fantastic pitching. There was just never really a chance to have a consistent spot because of constant bad injuries. He ended up retiring after not being able to pitch for a few years. It's always a shame to see a career go that way, but to come away with something that only a few dozen human beings have accomplished is pretty special. Just 20 days after Dallas Braden completed the 19th perfect game in MLB history, Roy Halladay had something of his own brewing down in Florida. Wait, Florida? No, it can't be Tampa Bay again. Well, luckily for the Rays, it is not. This perfect game took place in Miami against the Marlins. The Philadelphia Phillies were coming off a season in 2009 where they lost in the World Series to the New York Yankees, but they had won just the year prior to that. In an effort to keep the momentum going, the Phillies made a trade for Roy Halladay in December of 2009. If you're wondering how this trade panned out for the Phillies, Halladay accrued more B-WAR in 2010 than all 3 of those guys have gotten in their careers. Josh Johnson was facing Halladay in this game, and he was in the prime of his career, so this game was expected to be a pitcher's duel, and that's what we got. So let's get started. The box score wouldn't tell you this, but Halladay got off to kind of a shaky start in the first inning, at least compared to how he performed the rest of the game. Against the leadoff batter Chris Coghlan, he fell behind 2-1, and the count ended up getting to 3-2. On the 3-2 pitch, Halladay got a little bit of help from the home plate umpire, as this pitch is pretty clearly off the plate. Without that call, this entire perfect game is ruined from the get-go. Then against the third batter of the inning, Hanley Ramirez, he fell behind 3-1 and got another low corner strike call. Now, this was definitely closer than the first one, and really could have gone either way from the umpire, but Halladay now has the knowledge that this home plate umpire is calling these low corner pitches and can take advantage of it. I don't want to highlight every missed call, because I don't think it's super interesting, but this was a pretty consistent thing all game. Although Halladay struck out 2 of the 3 batters he faced, he ended up with a pretty high 19 pitches after the first, an unrealistic pace of 170 plus pitches. So he needed to settle in after this one. Then in the third inning, the Phillies are able to get a run for Halladay on the board. With 1 out in the third, Wilson Valdez lines a single to center field. Then Chase Utley hits a line drive of his own toward Cameron Maybin, who makes a crucial misplay on this ball, causing it to roll all the way to the warning track. This led to Valdez scoring and Utley rolling up to third. If you've ever heard that the most difficult play for an outfielder to read is the one hit right at them, this is that play in a nutshell. Maybin misreads the ball, takes a few steps in, and fails to get back in time. Johnson is able to get out of the inning without further damage though. In the bottom of that inning, Maybin comes up to the plate and hits a high fly to right center field, where Shane Victorino and Jason Worth nearly collide with one another. It ended up working out, but there's certainly a chance it wouldn't have. We're going to jump forward a bit to 1 out in the 6th inning for a big defensive play. After getting ahead in the count 3-1, Maybin grounds the ball toward the shortstop Valdez, who fires to first and gets him just in time. Since Maybin was running out of the box immediately and the ball was a bit of a chopper, this was seriously a close play at first. Over to the bottom of the 7th, Halladay throws a scary 2-1 pitch that almost hits Hanley Ramirez. Then Ramirez fouls off what likely would have been ball 4, but it was a fantastic pitch. Then Halladay gets him looking on the inside corner. Up until this point, the Philly commentators have mostly avoided talking about the elephant in the room, although I did find this weird.
Halladay takes a no-hitter into the 8th inning.
It feels like Tom McCarthy wanted to acknowledge it, but didn't want to fully commit, so he said no-hitter instead of going all the way by saying perfect game. I just found that kind of funny. The next play is in the bottom of the 8th. Jorge Cantu at the plate hits a rope to Juan Castro at third base, and he makes a pretty fantastic play to get him at first. So far, Halladay hasn't really needed any defensive highlights from his guys, but this is the first for sure. Finally, in the bottom of the 9th, Halladay retires Wes Helms with 4 pitches, all thrown in the same exact spot off the plate. It goes to show how dominant a pitcher can be when they adapt to an umpire's tendencies. It's unfortunate for the hitters. These pitches are clearly not strikes, but it's also not Halladay's fault they're being called this way. Why wouldn't he take advantage of the situation? Halladay ends up completing this perfect game with a Ronnie Paulino groundout. Fun fact, all 3 hitters in this inning were pinch hit for. It's hard to think of Halladay's toughest out in this game, as he struck out 11 batters in total and really was never forced into high pitch counts other than early on. Out of everyone, I'm inclined to give it to Jorge Cantu because he got Halladay to a 3-ball count in the 2nd, had a softly hit ground ball in the 5th that could have been misplayed, and that hard hit grounder that forced Juan Castro to make a great play. I would also give Castro the most pivotal defensive play, but part of me wants to give it to Maybin for the error he made. This game was the closest we've seen when it comes to the final score, and without that error to bring a run in, this perfect game could have been ruined by extra innings. I didn't say it had to be by the winning team, and I make the rules here, so I can do whatever I want anyways. So I'm counting it. I will give Castro the non-pitcher MVP though for that defensive play, and also for going 2 for 4. As for the highest win probability added play, I do think it's fairly obvious that it has to be from Maybin's error that allowed the run to score, and it looks like it was. And that's that. Roy Halladay accomplished both his first no-hitter and first perfect game on May 29th, 2010, in a game that lasted for 2 hours and 13 minutes. With the 1-0 score, I was expecting it to be our quickest, but it's tough to beat the pace Buehrle was on during his perfect game. What's even crazier is Halladay getting another no-hitter in the playoffs this year. A perfect game, a playoff no-hitter, and a Cy Young in your first year with the team is just ridiculous. Roy Halladay was something else. Less than 2 years after Roy Halladay's perfect game, we make our return to the Chicago White Sox. On April 21st, 2012, Philip Humber tossed the 21st perfect game in MLB history. Humber took the mound for the White Sox against the Mariners in Seattle. This also happens to be the year that Mark Buehrle left the team. After 12 years on the White Sox, Buehrle joined the Miami Marlins on a 4-year deal. There was certainly a hole left in the White Sox rotation, and somebody needed to step up and be the consistent starter that Buehrle always was. Now, Chris Sale ended up filling that hole pretty quick, but Humber was expected to expand his role. After being the 3rd overall draft pick by the Mets in 2004, Humber had Tommy John surgery pretty early on and wasn't really the same after it. So when he did get those few starts, he didn't do great. By the time he was on the White Sox in 2011, they were the 4th major league team he pitched for. So with Humber's first game of 2012, he had a good start, only giving up a run in just under 6 innings. Then he had his second start. We'll begin with some offense in the top of the second. Paul Konerko sends a ball to left field and over the fence, giving the White Sox an early lead. Then in the 3rd inning with 2 outs, the Sox scored once again. This time, Konerko almost hits another home run, but he ends up with a long RBI single. Right after, AJ Pierzynski hits an RBI single of his own to make it 3-0. For Humber, the gist of his first 3 innings is that the Mariners have been very aggressive at the plate, and there really hasn't been a single challenging at-bat or notable defensive play for me to talk about. The play that I want to begin with is in the bottom of the 4th. Dustin Ackley gets the first really solid contact for the Mariners and lines one to right field. Alex Rios has to track this ball and leap up to make the play. It's not a miraculous play, but it's the first play behind Humber that has needed more than just ordinary effort. In the bottom of the 5th inning, Dave Sims says this.
Right now, the Mariners threw 4, being no hit by Philip Humber.
Sims is undeniably skipping the hints and acknowledging what's going on in this game. He also goes on to say by the end of the inning that it's a perfect game. I found this one really interesting for a few reasons. If you're familiar with Dave Sims, he was the primary play-by-play guy for the Seattle Mariners from 2007 all the way up to this most recent season. So why use the opposing team's commentary for this one? Well, this was actually a nationally televised game on Fox, but Fox also televised a Yankees-Red Sox game with Joe Buck commentating at the same time. As a result, the majority of North American markets were given the Yankees-Red Sox game. The Humber game was only being shown to Mariners and White Sox markets, which makes you question why even bother nationally broadcasting it. I have no issue with Dave Sims. I love his play-by-play, but I'm wondering if the acknowledgement of the perfect game is because it's against his team, or because it was a national broadcast. Maybe even both. I say this not because I think a broadcaster can truly jinx something, but the commentary echoed a different feeling than from the other perfect games. But let's move on. We're gonna take another big jump here to the 7th inning. The reason for this is the same as with the first 3 innings. Humber was just dealing. So much so that he threw just 20 pitches the second time through the order. 20. Just one of those at-bats resulted in a 2-strike count, as all the other ones were balls in play before he even got to 2 strikes. Whatever the Mariners' plan was against Humber to start the game, it became significantly worse the second time through the order. They were starting to get way more aggressive and it just wasn't working. With the bottom of the 7th, things mostly stayed the same. Just one 2-strike count by Humber this inning, but that was against Sean Figgins, who does hit a foul ball that causes a big scare for everyone involved. He eventually strikes out on the 7th pitch, the most Humber has thrown in an AB so far. Now all the way to the top of the 9th inning with 2 outs. The White Sox get another run on the board courtesy of a Diaz single. Considering the point we're at in the game, I'm not so sure if this one will be at the top of our win probability chart, but it's worth pointing out. So far, this game has really been just sheer dominance from Humber. He didn't have a single 3-ball count through 8 frames and maybe 1 or 2 hard-hit balls all game. The Sox scored runs early, there was just one play that required above average effort, and Humber was just unfazed the entire time. The 9th inning is where things changed, as Humber fell behind 3-0 to the first batter of the inning, Michael Saunders. However, Humber comes right back with a called strike, a swinging strike, and one last swinging strike to put away Saunders. This was a clutch job from Humber, and he easily could have fallen to the pressure of his first bad count all game. For the last out, Brendan Ryan came into the game to pinch hit for Munenori Kawasaki, with the sole goal of saving the Mariners from embarrassment. He's able to work a 1-2 count into a 3-2 count and fouls off the 6th pitch to stay alive. Now is when things get bizarre. AJ Pierzynski calls for a slider on this pitch, which everyone knew was untouchable all game. Pierzynski eventually said, "I'm not going to lie, I was being a little selfish. No matter what, I still wanted the no-hitter. If he walked him, he walked him." I don't even really think this was an incredibly selfish decision to try to beat someone with your best pitch. If it doesn't work out, you've still got a no-hitter going. Well, Humber proceeds to throw a slider that really wasn't in the zone at any point, and Brendan Ryan tries to check his swing. The home plate umpire rings him up, which leads to Ryan immediately arguing with him. Meanwhile, as all this is happening, the ball goes past Przinsky's glove and rolls toward the on-deck circle. It takes Ryan far too long to notice this, and by the time he starts running to first, Przinsky has fielded the ball and throws him out, sealing the perfect game. Then Ryan goes back to complaining while the Sox players mob Humber. Should he have immediately argued with the umpire? Definitely not. But the real question is, did Ryan check his swing? Well, the Fox broadcast made this question even greater in people's minds because they never showed an alternate angle of it. And since this was a nationally broadcasted game, this is the only available footage we have. I was able to find this fan video on YouTube of the final out, and it's honestly a pretty fantastic angle for analyzing a check swing. After looking at it, I do think it's close, but I believe Ryan did go. Check swings will always be infamous for being strictly a judgment call, but I would say this was the correct one. A very bizarre ending. But for the toughest out of the game, I think it's going to be heavily influenced by those ABs in the ninth. Saunders didn't really have a memorable game at the plate. Nobody on the Mariners did. But after his ninth inning AB, I think I'll have to choose him for the toughest out. For the most pivotal defensive play, I think it's the Alex Rios leaping catch. The final out was definitely crazy, but I think Rios made a difficult play and should be recognized for it. When it comes to the non-pitcher MVP though, I think I'll give it to AJ Przinsky. So far, I don't think I've given the catchers of these games enough praise, and they're a part of these perfect games as much as the pitcher is. Humber wasn't exactly an ace, so I think Przinsky deserves a lot of credit for calling a great game and really trying to play to Humber's strengths. Lastly, the highest win probability play. I think it was Konerko's home run, and it was, tied with his single at 11%. This 2012 Mariners team was one of the worst offensive teams of the 21st century. They ranked dead last in batting average, on base percentage, and slugging percentage among all 30 teams. Humber's 2012 season couldn't have begun any better. He had a .63 ERA in 14.1 innings through his first 2 starts of the year, and yada yada yada, he ended up on waivers by November. But for real, the rest of the season he had an ERA of 7.39 and even got moved to the bullpen by August. He was off the White Sox by the end of the 2012 season, and 2013 would end up being his last. It's unfortunate that Humber's career didn't meet the expectations of a 3rd overall pick, but in a way, he did exceed them for just 2 hours and 17 minutes on a random Saturday in April. The day is June 13th, 2012, and we find ourselves back on the West Coast, this time in San Francisco, California. Matt Cain's perfect game occurred less than 2 months after Philip Humber's. In 2011, the Giants failed to make the postseason after winning it all in 2010, so a return to October was a big part of their expectations. Before this game, Matt Cain was off to a pretty great start to 2012, and going into June 13th, Cain was set to face the Houston Astros at home. 2012 was the last year the Astros were in the National League, and they didn't exactly leave on a good note. They were in the midst of back-to-back 100-loss seasons, and 2013 ended up making it 3 in a row. So let's dive into this game, starting with the bottom of the first inning. The Giants got the offense going pretty early in the first inning thanks to a Melky Cabrera 2-run shot, making it 2-0. But the offense didn't stop there. In the bottom of the second, Pablo Sandoval hits a single to right field, and Brandon Belt comes up right after him and hits a ball to straightaway center field, making it 4-0 Giants already. Then Joaquin Arias breaks for home on a Gregor Blanco groundout, bumping the score up to 5-0 in just the second inning. If you notice, I'm rattling through these runs scored pretty quickly because we have a lot of offense to cover. So tons of run support for Cain early, and while that can definitely ease the stress when it comes to winning, it's potentially distracting for a perfect game. You want to keep the intensity. As we get to the top of the third inning, I do want to point out a potentially controversial call. A 2-2 pitch on Chris Snyder that's just a bit off the plate results in him getting rung up. This wouldn't have been a walk or anything, but with Buster Posey being historically phenomenal at framing pitches throughout his career, I do want to point out that calls like these happen partly because of him. Down to the bottom of the third, the offensive explosion just continues. Melky Cabrera hits a single, and then Buster Posey hits a double to start off the inning. At this point, the win probability is likely in the 90s for the Giants, so any offense from now on will have minimal swings. So we're going to go through these quick. Sandoval and Belt back-to-back singles gets an RBI for each of them, and now it's 7-0 after 3 innings. As the inning rolls over to the top of the Astros lineup in the 4th, we get one of our earliest hints to the perfect game. Dwayne Kuiper takes note of Pablo Sandoval's defensive alignment at 3rd and suggests this.
Strike to Schaefer with Sandoval in at 3rd, thinking that Schaefer might just lay down a bunt.
Wouldn't seem all that likely.
Just never know.
It's not completely obvious, but to me it seems like he's referring to Cain's perfect game when he says, "You never know." Anyways, this at-bat against Jordan Schaefer has even more to offer. We're on a 1-2 count. Schaefer lines a ball that just barely bounces outside the bag. When looking at the replay, it's hard to tell as the ball begins to blend in with the white line and the base, but it kind of looks like it hits the base, right? But there is an angle that the ball did land before the base. A ridiculous call to have to make in the moment, and if I had to guess as to why the ball did take such a weird bounce but didn't hit the bag, there was probably some bunched up dirt or weird grooves in the ground from people's cleats that made the ball jump up like that. Astros manager Brad Mills comes out to argue for a moment, but there's really no point. Manager challenges didn't exist in 2012, and even if they did, this is still not a reviewable play today. But that also means if the umpire screwed up this play, the perfect game would be completely over with no chance at a review. Schaefer's at-bat doesn't stop there either. He ends up fouling off 5 pitches in total before striking out on the 10th pitch of the at-bat. Easily the longest AB of the game so far, and one of the most eventful ones too. As this game moves along, the Giants just don't stop scoring. On a Pablo Sandoval force out that the Astros failed to turn into a double play, another run scores. Then in the 5th inning, Blanco hits a 2-run home run to make it a double-digit deficit for Houston. This has become a complete and utter blowout. Thankfully, we can move past the slaughtering of J-Happ's 2012 ERA with some defensive highlights. In the 6th, Chris Snyder gets into one and sends a ball to deep left field, but it just doesn't quite have enough juice, and Melky Cabrera makes a leaping catch at the wall. Cain was pumped, and rightfully so. This was a great catch, and it really looked like it was leaving the yard for a moment there. Afterwards, in the top of the 7th, Jordan Schaefer forces Cain into a full count, the first 3-ball count since Brett Wallace did it in the 2nd inning. On the 6th pitch of the at-bat, Schaefer lines a ball toward Triple's alley, and Gregor Blanco adds to the highlight reel with his own ridiculous catch. Cabrera's catch was great, but Blanco laid out for this one, and it's one of the best we've seen in any of these games. The next at-bat of the inning is against Jose Altuve, who takes a pitch just off the plate to strike out looking. I've got another potentially controversial call to talk about in the top of the 8th, too. Wallace works his second 3-2 count of the game and the 4th by any Astro. On the last pitch, he takes a very close strike and goes down looking. I think this one is just off the plate, but the pitch comes back in as close as possible, and with Posey's framing, this was a match made in heaven for strike 3. Honestly, a masterclass in both pitch selection and framing from Posey in this game. The final play I want to highlight is the very last of the game. With 2 outs in the top of the 9th, Jason Castro comes in to pinch hit for the pitcher Xavier Cedeno. With this being a 10-run lead, it's just a last-ditch effort to try to save the team from embarrassment. A few innings before this on the Giants side, Brandon Crawford came in to play shortstop and Arias moved to 3rd, putting Pablo Sandoval on the bench as this game no longer needed his offense. This change ended up being important, as the last play of the game was a ground ball to Arias at 3rd, who really does not have himself in a great position to get momentum, but he steps back, fires a dart, and ends the perfect game. Now let's go through those most impactful plays. I think the toughest out has to go to Jordan Schaefer. Schaefer was the closest to ending this perfect game multiple times. His eventful at-bat in the 4th was the longest one of the game. Then in the 7th, Schaefer was the one who got absolutely robbed of a hit by Gregor Blanco. I don't even want to imagine the odds that neither of those batted balls went down for a hit. Speaking of the play in the 7th, that is definitely the most pivotal defensive play of the game. Blanco needed everything he had to get to this ball. A great jump, a great route, and a perfect dive. Blanco would also be my non-pitcher MVP. Despite every Giant raking, it also helps that he went 2 for 5 and drove in 3. For the highest win probability added, I think it's gotta be one of those early home runs. I think it'll be Cabrera's. pitchers, as Belts was while the game was 2-0 already and his pitcher had 2 perfect innings down. And it looks like it was between those two, with Cabrera's having the highest with 19%. After this perfect game, Cain went on to have a pretty great year. He had an ERA of 2.79 with 219.1 innings and got the highest placement in Cy Young voting of his career. Across the long history of the Giants, even going all the way back to their days in Upper Manhattan, this was the first perfect game by a Giants player, and subsequently the 22nd in MLB history. August 15th, 2012. 2 months later, once again, we are back to Safeco Field in Seattle for the second time in 1 year. This is the third perfect game in 2012 and the sixth in the span of 4 years. MLB has seen perfect game droughts that lasted over 3 decades before. This perfect game belongs to none other than Félix Hernández, when he was in the midst of his prime. From 2009 to 2015, he made 6 All-Star games and placed highly in Cy Young voting almost every one of those years, ultimately winning in 2010. So let's just jump right into this, and oh my god, the Rays are back. Tampa Bay has had a perfect game thrown against them 3 times in their first 15 years of existence. Since it's been a few years, this Rays team is a bit different from the ones we saw earlier, but there are some familiar faces. From the first play of the game, we already have something to highlight. With Sam Fuld leading off against Hernández, he sends a ball to deep right center field, and Eric Thames proceeds to run this one down. This is not an easy play, and you know at this point how much I love these early ones at the beginning of the game. The switch from the sunlight into the shadows couldn't have made it easy either. Great play, and a great start. Moving forward just a bit, we actually get to hear Dave Sims say this.
You want to talk about efficiency? 7 in the first, 10 in the second, 7 in the third, perfect through 3.
So, remember earlier when I was talking about Humber's perfect game, and I said I wasn't sure whether Sims was acknowledging it because of the national broadcast or because it was against his team? Well, it seems like it's neither, and this is just how he treats a perfect game, exactly how it is. No dancing around reality, he knows his words have no impact on the game at hand. So, I was kind of wrong. This is also the earliest we've heard a broadcaster hint at the perfect game or just outright say it's happening. So far, Jeremy Hellickson has been keeping the Mariners' offense at bay, but with 2 outs in the bottom of the third, Brendan Ryan steals second base and advances to third as the ball gets by the catcher Jose Lobaton. Then, Jesus Montero proceeds to drive him in with an RBI single. Back to Hernández, who has a tough start to the Rays' second time through the order. Against Sam Fuld, Felix is able to get ahead in the count with a called strike and a swinging strike, but his 1-2 pitch almost hits Fuld, and he eventually works the count to make it 3-2. On the 3-2 pitch, Fuld lines one the other way right at Kyle Seager, just a bit unlucky. We're going to take another big leap forward in this game to the top of the 7th inning. BJ Upton hits a chopper to the left side, and Kyle Seager attempts to dive for this ball, but misses. However, Brendan Ryan, the star of the crazy play at the end of Philip Humber's perfect game, was right there to field it and get the out at first. If Seager tipped this ball with his glove, we might have had a disaster. Of course, this isn't on Seager. He can't process where Ryan is positioned defensively in the split-second moment where he decided that he might have to be today's hero. We're just lucky that he missed this ball entirely and Ryan was there for the recovery. Then things get even more eventful right after, as the first pitch to Matt Joyce is a bit off the plate, but umpire Rob Drake calls it a strike. Joe Maddon takes exception to this and starts shouting from the dugout. Drake ejects him pretty quickly and Maddon comes out there to argue. Joe Maddon was the Rays manager for all 3 perfect games they faced, so maybe he was trying to fire them up a bit. This is also the first time anyone has been ejected in the games we've covered so far, so that's neat. We have more to talk about in this at-bat than just Joe Maddon though. Matt Joyce fouls off a few pitches and works the count to 3-2. If that first pitch was called a ball, things could have been entirely different here, but Joyce ends up grounding out on the 8th pitch of the at-bat. I actually only have one more thing to highlight, and it's the entirety of the top of the 8th inning. This inning doesn't really fit in any of the categories I created, but it's an absolute masterpiece of baseball. Hernández is facing the strongest part of Tampa's lineup for the last time, and the crowd is as intense as they can be. Starting with Longoria, he freezes him on the first pitch with a curveball in the zone, then baits him into swinging at the same pitch well below the zone 2 more times. Ben Zobrist would end up striking out as well, recipient of a nasty changeup that just disappeared. Carlos Pena was Felix's final victim, getting his own healthy dose of curveballs and changeups, leading to the entire side striking out. Felix would proceed to strike out 2 more in the 9th, closing out the perfecto with his best stuff of the entire game. I think the only player that Madden fired up was Félix Hernández, as he struck out 5 of the last 6 batters he saw. There weren't many tough outs for Felix in this game, but out of everyone on the Rays, I'd say Sam Fuld was the toughest. He set the tone early with that deep flyout, followed by his AB in the 4th that ended in a line out right at Kyle Seager. Fuld was the only hitter in the Rays starting lineup that didn't strike out either. For the most pivotal defensive play, it's really only between the first play of the game by Thames and Ryan's play in the 7th. I think Thames's was more difficult, so I'm gonna give it to that, but Ryan's play with Seager diving in front of him was maybe the most important. Looking at the candidates for the non-pitcher MVP, it's kinda tough. The Mariners' offense was dormant for pretty much the entire game, and not many defensive plays required above average effort. But Brendan Ryan almost single-handedly manufactured their only run by getting on first, stealing second, and then moving to third on the pass ball. I think that, along with the key defensive play in the 7th, puts the spotlight on him amongst an otherwise light game from the position players. Finally, I think it's safe to say the single by Montero to score Ryan was the highest win probability play of the game, and sure enough, it was. Every perfect game is going to be dominant, but this was a seriously fantastic performance by Félix Hernández, and maybe the most impressive of all the perfect games we've seen. John Jaso caught for Hernández, and interestingly enough, the Rays traded him to the Mariners in the offseason prior. He was a part of the Rays in 2010 when Dallas Braden had his perfect game, but he didn't make the lineup for that one. Félix Hernández is one of the big names joining Hall of Fame ballots in 2025, and he is a very intriguing case. He had a prime as good as any other pitcher of his generation, but the steep drop-off as he got older is going to negatively affect his chances. I don't know if he gets in, but he'll always have one of the most incredible performances by a starting pitcher, and in just 2 hours and 22 minutes, he holds the 23rd perfect game in MLB history. Nearly 11 years later, we return to a familiar location, the Coliseum in Oakland. On June 28, 2023, this perfect game took place during one of the lowest lows in athletics history, a season where they ended with 112 losses. Since then, other than their slightly better record, things haven't gotten much better, and the Oakland Coliseum is the home of the A's no longer. But the writing was on the wall for that well before 2024. The man who really made this disaster even worse was none other than Yankees starter Domingo Germán. Germán was never a decorated starter in the league, having mostly played the role of a lower rotational guy for the Yankees since 2017. As is the case with most low priority guys in a big league rotation, you don't have much slack for your poor performances. Prior to this perfect game, his rotational spot was kind of on the chopping block. He was coming into this game with a 5.1 ERA on the season, with his 2 most recent starts combining for 15 earned runs in just 5.1 innings. Pretty horrendous. So bouncing back was a requisite to keep his current role on this team. So far in the Aaron Judge era of the Yankees, this is easily the black sheep season. Mainly because they missed the playoffs for the first time since Judge was a rookie, so it was a low year for both teams, even though the lows of the Yankees were missing the playoffs 1 time, versus the lows of the A's being the city of Oakland losing their storied franchise. Anyways, let's get into the perfect game itself. We're going to start off in the bottom of the 3rd. With 1 out, Shea Langoliers hits a high fly ball to left field. Isaiah Kiner-Falefa ends up taking a strange route to this ball, either misjudging it or having trouble with the wind, but he makes the play. It's a routine play, but it ended up scarier than it needed to be, likely because Kiner-Falefa is not an outfielder and had never played a game in the outfield prior to 2023. With Kiner-Falefa in left, we also have Giancarlo Stanton in right, who has almost exclusively been a DH since he left Miami, and then Harrison Bader in center one of the best outfield defenders in the league. I just had to point out the insane juxtaposition that is this outfield, especially when just one error or bad route can end a perfect game. In the top of the 4th inning with 2 outs, Giancarlo Stanton gets a hold of one and proceeds to send an absolute monster shot to left field for a home run. Funnily enough, this is the first hit of the game by the Yankees, so Domingo Germán and ace starter JP Sears both had no hitters up until this point. With no outs in the bottom of the 4th, Tony Kemp almost gets plunked by Germán's first pitch of the inning. In the same at-bat, Kemp hits a hard grounder just foul to the first baseline. 2 incidents that came very close to killing this perfect game, but Kemp eventually hacks one out to the warning track for an easy out. In the next AB against Ryan Noda, Germán faces his first threat of a free pass. He goes down in the count 3-1, but he comes back with back-to-back curveballs to get Noda out swinging. Moving along, the 5th inning is where the bloodbath begins, and I'm gonna go through it all. Kiner Falefa walks, Higashioka hits an RBI double to score him, making it 2-0 Yankees. Anthony Volpe lays down a bunt that forces an error, making it 3-0. Then after Volpe steals third, LeMahieu hits a single to make it 4-0. Gleyber Torres and Anthony Rizzo both reach base to make it bases loaded. And just like that, after JP Sears threw 4 innings of 1 run, 1 hit ball, 6 straight Yankees hitters reach base, and he's out of the game. Baseball is just funny like that, and not a single out was recorded before Sears left the mound. The Yankees successfully score another 3 runs this inning, but at this point the win probability from their offense is running on diminishing returns, so we're going to move on. But this was easily the longest inning of the game as the Yankees batted around the order. Down in the bottom of the 5th, Seth Brown has begun to settle into a 2-1 count. He then proceeds to sit on a curve and send a hard hit ground ball toward Anthony Rizzo, who has to quickly dive to make the grab. He then flips the ball to Germán to get the out. This is definitely the most impressive defensive play so far, and since we finally have StatCast available, we can find out that this ball was hit 106 miles an hour, so it was a rocket. This ends up being the hardest hit ball by Oakland's lineup all game. Rizzo's defensive gem also directly leads into our play-by-play broadcaster Ryan Ruocco, possibly giving a hint at its greater significance. Right after the out is made, Ruocco says,
"Mark that one down, Anthony Rizzo."
I think the inflection in Ruocco's voice is pretty clear. By the top of the 7th, the Yankees put up another run on the board. Stanton walks and then is taken out of the game for Oswaldo Cabrera, who moves up to third on a Harrison Bader single and scores on a sacrifice fly by Josh Donaldson. In the bottom of the 7th, Germán successfully strikes out Ryan Noda for the 3rd time, to which Noda tries to snap his bat but is left with the shameful reality where it doesn't break. So now he's struck out 3 times and his leg probably hurts, but at least the bat isn't broken. The next thing to highlight is here in the bottom of the 8th. Germán gets into only his 2nd 3-ball count of the game, and on the 3-1 pitch, he basically throws a get-me-over middle curveball to get it to 3-2. Bride ends up fouling the 6th pitch and ultimately grounds out to end the inning. This was also kind of a scary play where Donaldson throws the ball a tad offline, but Anthony Rizzo makes it look pretty effortless to get this put out by transitioning into foul grounds. And that's everything I've got for this perfect game. The Yankees make it a double-digit lead in the 9th, and Germán throws a nice and easy 6-pitch final inning to end this one off, leaving him just a single pitch under 100. Of the perfect games I covered in this video, only Philip Humber was able to have a lower pitch count with 96. For the final time, let's see who was the toughest out of the game. And of all the perfect games, this is one of the hardest ones for me to decide. Among all the A's hitters, I feel like Seth Brown might be the one I'd go with. I thought about Ryan Noda. Even though on paper he struck out all 3 times, I still felt like he put up competitive ABs, which not many did. But Seth Brown was the closest to getting a hit and had the hardest hit ball out of all of the A's players. I think it is pretty clear that the same hard hit ball by Seth Brown fielded by Anthony Rizzo has to be the most pivotal defensive play of the game. For the non-pitcher MVP, I'm really inclined to give it to Giancarlo Stanton. Remember, although this became a blowout, the Yankees were without Aaron Judge and were hitless themselves until Stanton knocked a home run in the 4th inning. Once that happened, Sears was completely shaken up and it allowed the offense to then go all out. Finally, I believe that leads us directly to the highest win probability added play, which I would guess is Stanton's home run. And while it turns out that it is, I'm shocked to see how close it was to being overtaken by Kyle Higashioka's double. And that is everything. The final and most recent perfect game, ending a decade-plus long drought, was done by Domingo Germán, who went right back to a 4.61 ERA for the rest of the season. A rest of the season that really was only the month of July, as Germán was the center of a very complicated clubhouse situation and also ended up getting put on the restricted list for alcohol abuse. It's a sad situation, but it also was just the next thing in a series of more than questionable behavior. I'm not here to pass judgment. I'm sure there's plenty of people who have done bad things, but it's impossible not to acknowledge it when his season and career with the Yankees pretty much ended just a month after making history. Germán had a pretty awful year with the Pirates in 2024, so given behavior and recent performances, I don't expect to see much of him moving forward. Well, that's everything that I consider to be the best or most notable or most important or whatever you want to call it parts of all 8 perfect games from the 21st century. I feel like all these perfect games truly show you why it is so rare. No matter how good a pitcher is, there are so many variables, whether it's dumb luck or not, that can happen on a baseball field, and many of these perfect games needed every single thing to go right for them to happen. You know, it could be World Series Game 7 or a nothing game between 2 fifth-place teams in September. It could be arguably the greatest pitcher of all time or someone with less than a dozen WAR. I have a few things left I want to touch on. Here's how I'd rank how much I overall enjoyed watching these perfect games, 1 being my favorite down to 8 being my least favorite, just for fun. And finally, because I'm sure someone will mention it, Armando Galarraga's near-perfect game isn't here, and I feel like I should clarify that it's not here because it isn't a perfect game. That's not me saying it shouldn't have been, it just unfortunately isn't. Maybe that can open up an opportunity for me to discuss near-perfect games in the future though. Thanks for watching.